there's this concept in history called Lysenkoism, and it was basically created by this man named T.D. Trofim Lysenko. I don't know what his middle name was, if I'm being honest. And it's basically a science-denying, genetics-denying ideology that the Soviet Union adopted, essentially, from like the mid-1920s until after Stalin in like 1953. So like actually way after Stalin, I think at least a few years. I can't remember exactly when they ousted him, but the damage had been done by that point in time. But what happened was, in the Soviet Union, I think the first thing you got to understand is the agriculture situation in the Soviet Union, which is that they have really bad land in Russia, and basically the worst farmed lands in the United States are equivalent to the best farmed lands that they have in Russia. So most of the stuff that they farm in Russia, the U.S. wouldn't even consider farming. And because of that, they have always struggled to find the right kind of crop to grow in terms of grains. So what they did is they turned to their geneticists in the 1920s, and they said, we need you to develop a combination of two strains that we have. We have a winter strain that's durable but doesn't yield that much, and we have a summer strain that yields a good amount of grain but doesn't actually survive our winters and really can't survive that much in that many places in Russia. And Nikolai Vasilov, who's this world-renowned geneticist who lives in the Soviet Union, he's all on board with the socialist cause, because remember, at this point in time, people haven't really discovered what the Soviet Union is really going to become. And so he's on board with the socialist movement at this point in time. And he's an amazing scientist. He's one of those guys who barely sleeps. He's just driven by his work. And he tells the Soviets, yeah, we can do it. It's just going to take me a while, because I've got to grow all the plants. I've got to crossbreed them. I've got to check to see if their yields are better. There's a lot of work involved in creating a new breed, and some of it's trial and error, so it takes a fair chunk of time. But for those of you who know anything about Soviet history, you've probably at least heard of the 5-year plans. And the Soviets were really big on getting things done quickly. And in fact, they would rather you lie about what you think is possible than tell them the truth, if the truth is that you can't get what they want done. Meaning, if you look at the expectations for what was going to be produced during the first 5-year plan, they're insane. They're going to go from being 10% of the U.S.'s production to surpassing it. And that's because the first guys who said, I think that we can do this, and they presented some reasonable number, those guys got sent to a gulag because they didn't understand the power of socialism. And so the next guy sees what happened to the first guy, and he's like, no, we can beat the Americans, right? And so that kind of overestimation was rampant in the Soviet Union. And there's a few other things going on in the Soviet Union at the time. They have a sort of an anti-intellectual, anti-Western tilt to all of their stuff at this point in time. So if you can come up with a theory that shows the strength of the worker or the peasant, and the intellectual prowess of that kind of determination that the individual has, then they'll go with your theory even stronger than if you had been someone who's more of a standard intellectual. So all these factors come together when this man named Lysenko, who I mentioned at the beginning of the video, basically says, I can solve this problem a lot faster for you guys. We don't have to use this Western idea of this capitalist idea of genetics. What we can do is we can do what's called vernalization. So he rebadges a theory that already existed, where if you cold germinate a seed, it'll do better in cold weather. And he actually does produce, from what I've read, slightly better yields per acre, but it requires so much more effort to do that you end up farming a lot less acres. So yield per acre goes up, but total yield actually goes down. So the result was, though, that the Soviets, they never really paid attention to that, because he presents it to them as this political thing, right? He says, don't believe that capitalist Vasilov, don't believe his Mendelian genetics. I've got this, this true Soviet solution to the problem that no one else knows about because of my socialist brilliance, right? He's just using like these words, and because of the kind of ideology that's present in the Soviet Union at the time, it works. And what happens is his theory gets put into play. Some peasants try to do it, and the result is agriculture continues to decline in the Soviet Union. Vasilov really doesn't get what he needs in order to complete his study, and eventually, like, Vasilov's actually totally discredited as along with Mendelian genetics. So modern genetics gets discredited in the Soviet Union, and Lysenko keeps coming up with new agricultural ideas that don't really work, but people can't really prove that they do or do not work, so he never gets ousted from control. And anyone who contradicts him, he calls them, like, a capitalist sympathizer, or someone who doesn't believe in the socialist cause, or any other number of stupid political attacks that he makes. And Vasilov, who eventually, because he's sort of the head of genetics in the Soviet Union in terms of, actual geneticists, comes out and just says, look, this guy's a full-blown idiot. Like, why is he being given this much power? And the Soviets put Vasilov, that is, not Lysenko, they put Vasilov, the world-renowned geneticist, in a gulag during World War II, which, let's just say, the gulags did not receive food priority, and Vasilov starves to death. Now, I bring Lysenkoism up, right? The tragedy that is Soviet genetics in the early, or the first half, and actually I think until like the 60s or 70s. It must have actually been before Brezhnev, so maybe during Khrushchev. But I bring it up because I think there's some parallels that you can draw between that era and our current era. And the main reason I say that is because I believe that today in the United States, science is getting politicized in a way that it really shouldn't be. You have congressmen ignoring scientists, throwing snowballs in the Capitol building, and it's really kind of terrifying. I know a lot of people are like, oh, what an idiot, that's stupid, that's funny. But when someone like that has power, right? Now that congressman doesn't have power within the scientific community. He might have been a senator. I can't remember. But when someone like him has power, it's bad. And it's kind of worse when that power is within the scientific community and has the power to, remove people like Vasilov. So it's not as bad as the Soviet Union, but it's still really bad because they control the funding, they control the sort of the political actions that we would take to address the concerns of the scientific community. And so the result is that even if we have the scientists saying what they need to say, if we have politicians like that, people in power like that, who deny and politicize science, the result is that the things that we need to do and the things that we need to accomplish simply won't get the attention or the funding. They just won't get done. And that's terrifying to me. I didn't mention this, or maybe I did, but the Soviet Union struggled to feed its own people. Part of the reason was that whenever they had, I call it excess grain, it wasn't really excess grain. They would just sell grain and to fund their industrial activities that they actually needed to feed their people. And so that magnified the starvation. But they did struggle to produce as much grain as they wanted. I believe that they didn't actually return to like I can't remember what year, like 1915. So the year, like a couple years before the Soviet revolution, right? The socialist revolution, where it was like the peak grain that the Soviet Union had ever produced, or that Russia had ever produced, and they didn't match that number again until like the 1960s or 70s or something, because of all of this stuff that they were trying. Part of the reason was that Lysenko has shut down the genetics, right? So they are not able to improve the kind of crops they have. So that didn't help agriculture. They also were trying other socialist experiments, like they had collectives and stuff like that never produced as much grain as privately held farms did. But the point that I'm trying to make is that this denying of genetics by the Soviet Union actually contributed to the cost of millions of lives. And I worry that, while we kind of laugh at how silly our politicians look when they're denying science, that while that's happening, real consequences are happening too. So that scares me. It really does, because this is stuff that actually needs to get solved. And I hope it doesn't spread throughout every aspect of science. The more science gets politicized, the more inhibited it is from doing what it is designed to do, right? To answer the questions. The more we restrict science from asking questions, the more that we deny the answers that it comes up with, the less productive the scientific community really is going to be. And we need them to be productive. We've got a lot of big problems. So hopefully we can rectify this. And hopefully an understanding of an example in history like Lysenkoism, where people have denied science, and the consequences of that will convince you to listen to our scientists, to listen to the scientific community, and to try to ignore anyone who politicizes it, because those are the people that want you to believe something. The scientists they want you to believe something, but they just want you to, they don't have a political agenda for the most part, unless, they're funded by, for example, the oil companies. But that's not real, you can't have an oil company fund that kind of research for obvious reasons. Hopefully, I don't have to go into that. Good luck. It's tough out there.